In the early 1940s, Japan believed that its empire was secure. Its generals were convinced that geography, distance, and determination would protect the nation from any foreign air attack. For decades, Japanese military planners assumed their homeland was unreachable for heavy bombers. The Pacific Ocean acted like a natural wall, and Japan believed that no enemy aircraft could cross thousands of miles, carry enough bombs, and still return safely. But everything changed in 1944 when the United States introduced a weapon that rewrote the rules of modern warfare, the Boeing B-29 Superfortress. The B-29 was unlike anything Japan had ever imagined. It flew higher, faster, and farther than any bomber in history. With pressurized cabins, long-range capabilities, remote-controlled gun turrets, and the ability to carry massive bomb loads, it represented a leap forward in American industrial engineering. At a time when Japan's factories were struggling to keep up with basic wartime production, the United States had created a machine so advanced that it looked like something from the future. And in 1944 and 1945, this machine would devastate Japan's industry, destroy its factories, cripple its economy, and push the nation to the brink of collapse. Before the bombing campaign began, Japan's industrial system was already under pressure. The country lacked key natural resources like oil, steel, rubber, and aluminum. Its factories depended heavily on materials brought from conquered territories, and its transportation network was vulnerable. By 1944, Allied submarines had destroyed much of Japan's merchant fleet, choking off supply lines. Even before the B-29s arrived, Japan's industrial machine was starting to sputter. But it was still functioning enough to produce aircraft, ships, guns, and ammunition. The Japanese military believed it could continue fighting for years. They underestimated just how quickly the United States could dismantle an entire nation's industry from the air. The American strategy to defeat Japan from above began with the capture of the Mariana Islands. Saipan, Tinian, and Guam were transformed into massive air bases built specifically for the B-29. These islands placed Japan's industrial centers, Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama, within striking distance. For the first time, American bombers had a direct path to the Japanese homeland, with no mountains or borders blocking their way. From these new airfields, thousands of B-29s began launching into the sky, and Japan's once distant war suddenly arrived on its doorstep. At first, the B-29s attempted high-altitude precision bombing. American planners hoped they could knock out specific factories, aircraft plants, steel mills, shipyards, and electrical stations. But high winds, cloud cover, and technical problems made precision bombing over Japan extremely difficult. Many early raids missed their targets or caused only small amounts of damage. Japan's leaders felt confident that if the B-29s continued with this approach, the nation could survive. They believed American air raids would be inconvenient, not catastrophic. But American commanders knew that precision bombing alone would not break Japan's industrial backbone. So in early 1945, General Curtis LeMay introduced a brutal new strategy: low-altitude nighttime incendiary bombing. Instead of dropping heavy explosive bombs onto factories, the B-29s would release hundreds of thousands of small firebombs onto Japan's cities. These were not ordinary bombs. They were napalm devices designed to ignite instantly and spread liquid fire in all directions. And because much of Japan's urban housing was made of wood and paper, entire neighborhoods could burn like dry grass in minutes. On the night of March 9th, 1945, the first major firebombing raid targeted Tokyo. More than 300 B-29s flew low over the capital, dropping nearly 2,000 tons of incendiaries. What followed was one of the most devastating air attacks in world history. Flames raced through the city, consuming buildings, factories, workshops, and homes. Ironically, many of the industrial sites destroyed that night were small family-run operations, Tiny machine shops, metal workers, electricians, carpenters, and craftsmen who produced vital war materials. Japan's industrial system was not centralized like America's. It relied heavily on thousands of small subcontractors. When entire blocks of workers' homes and shops vanished in firestorms, the ripple effect crippled major factories that depended on them. By morning, Tokyo was unrecognizable. The firestorm killed tens of thousands of civilians and destroyed more square miles than even the atomic bombings later that year. And this was only the beginning. Night after night, the B-29s struck major Japanese cities. Nagoya burned, Osaka burned, Kobe burned, Yokohama burned. Entire industrial districts disappeared under clouds of black smoke. Japan could not replace the machines, tools, or skilled workers it was losing. Every bombing run pushed the country further toward collapse. Japan's industrial leadership was shocked by the scale of destruction. They had expected attacks on aircraft factories or shipyards, not the total annihilation of the urban workforce. Many of the city-based industries that supplied the military simply ceased to exist. Assembly lines stopped because components stopped arriving. Military planners begged for more resources, but there was nothing left to give. Japan's ability to build aircraft dropped sharply in 1945. Shipbuilding nearly stopped. Weapons production fell. Ammunition factories were destroyed or cut off from materials. Japan had fought for years to maintain its war machine, but in just a few months, the B-29s tore it apart. One of the biggest shocks to Japan came from the sheer size of the American bombing force. Thousands of B-29s operated continuously from the Marianas. Many missions involved 500 or more bombers in the air at once. Japan's few remaining fighter aircraft could not challenge them effectively. Fuel shortages grounded many Japanese planes, and the pilots who remained lacked training. Anti-aircraft defenses were too weak to stop the firebombing waves. Watching hundreds of massive American bombers fly unopposed over their cities convinced many Japanese civilians that the war was unwinnable. The psychological impact of the B-29 raids was enormous. Factories struggled to keep workers because people were fleeing destroyed neighborhoods. Skilled laborers were killed in the fires or drafted into emergency services. Transportation lines collapsed as rail yards, bridges, and highways burned. Coal, steel, oil, and copper supplies dwindled faster than anyone had expected. Even food distribution systems fell apart. The Japanese economy began to fail at every level, from raw materials to manufacturing to shipping. Civilians and military leaders alike felt the collapse accelerating around them. By mid-1945, many Japanese industrial zones were operating at less than 20% of their capacity. Some had shut down entirely. Japan tried to relocate factories into tunnels, mountainsides, and rural areas, but these efforts were disorganized and ineffective. The B-29s simply shifted their targets and destroyed new facilities as they appeared. Every attempt to restart production ended in smoke. Japan was fighting a war it could no longer supply. As the bombings intensified, American intelligence reports revealed a stunning truth. Japan was nearing complete industrial collapse. The nation had lost the ability to build planes, repair ships, manufacture weapons, or supply its army. The empire that had once believed it could conquer Asia was now struggling just to function, and the relentless B-29 raids ensured that nothing Japan built would survive long enough to matter. By the time the summer of 1945 arrived, Japan's industrial defeat was nearly complete. The country's wartime economy had imploded under the pressure of non-stop bombings. And even before the atomic bombs were dropped, many American commanders believed that Japan's surrender was only a matter of time. The B-29s had not just destroyed cities, they had destroyed the machinery of war itself. Factories, workers, transportation networks, and resources had all been consumed by fire. This was the moment when Japan realized that its ability to continue the war was vanishing. Its cities were in ruins, its factories were silent, its workers were displaced, and its military was running out of everything it needed to fight. America's B-29 bombing raids in 1945 had done what years of battles could not. They had broken the industrial backbone of the Japanese Empire. And Japan's leaders now faced a terrifying question. How much longer could the nation survive under this relentless destruction? As 1945 began, the scale of destruction unleashed by America's B-29 fleet was only accelerating. Tokyo's leadership had hoped that the industrial decentralization program, breaking factories into small hidden workshops, would protect production. But the B-29s were not hunting individual factories anymore. They were burning the entire industrial ecosystem, one city at a time. Every raid delivered a psychological reality check. The Japanese homeland was no longer defended by distance, ocean barriers, or the emperor's divine protection. The Americans had built a machine of war that did not tire, did not fear losses, and did not pause. Japan's industrial collapse was not a single moment. It was a chain reaction, each raid cutting another artery of the war economy until the nation's ability to fight simply dissolved. Workers who once operated precision machinery were now digging through rubble. Road networks had melted in the heat of the firestorms. Rail lines were twisted like blackened metal vines. Entire blocks of workshops, pieces of the same supply chain, had vanished in the night. The war was no longer about defending territory. It had become a desperate race for survival. Behind every raid was a calculation. Which city produced the tools that fed the military machine? Which industries were still breathing? And the B-29 struck exactly where it would hurt the most. Nagoya had been one of Japan's industrial jewels. Its aircraft factories produced major components for fighters, bombers, and engines. But in 1945, the city resembled a charcoal map. Blocks of ruins, drifting ash, and scorched beams pointing up like broken ribs. Workers tried to salvage parts from collapsed buildings, but there was nothing left to save. In Osaka, the nation's greatest port for heavy industry, the destruction was equally severe. Warehouses, oil depots, steel mills, machine shops, entire complexes were flattened. Production graphs that were once flatlined simply dropped to zero. Even when factories survived, power plants did not. Without electricity, machines that once crafted pistons and cylinders now sat silent. Japanese officers wrote in internal reports that it was impossible to repair aircraft when the factory producing spare parts had ceased to exist. The ripple effect was catastrophic. Planes that could not be repaired became scrap. Tanks never received engines. Warships waited for gun components that would never arrive. The industrial chain that held the entire military together had broken link by link. Japan's government attempted a final national mobilization, pushing civilians, teenagers, and elderly citizens into labor brigades. But people cannot replace machine tools, steel, electricity, or the precision ecosystem required for advanced weapons. The Americans understood this perfectly. They were not fighting Japan's army. They were fighting Japan's capacity to sustain one. The B-29 crews flew with the knowledge that each mission brought the war measurably closer to its end. But these missions were not without danger. Anti-aircraft guns still threatened them. Fighter interceptors launched desperate attacks. Mechanical failures over the ocean could doom an entire crew. They faced weather that could swallow aircraft whole. Yet despite everything, the superfortresses kept coming, hundreds at a time. By mid-1945, the Japanese leadership knew the situation was beyond recovery. Reports showed that aircraft production had fallen by more than half in months. Steel production had collapsed, explosives factories were gone, oil refineries were ashes, cities that once glowed with manufacturing life now flickered with only firelight. One Japanese industrial minister wrote privately, "We have returned to the age before machines." For a nation that had spent decades industrializing itself to stand among global powers, this was a devastating reality. The firebombing of Tokyo on March 9th to 10th, 1945, became the turning point of public morale. Residents saw miles of their city vanish in only hours. Families fled through rivers of flame. The scale was so overwhelming that even military police could not maintain order. Survivors described the ground glowing red under their feet as entire districts dissolved into heat. And above it all were the shadows of B-29s, unreachable, unshakable, and relentless. Each new raid weakened Japan's resolve. Cities that had never known war became symbols of its cost. Urban life dissolved into evacuation camps. Food shortages worsened as transportation collapsed. Factories could not ship products, even if they survived. By summer, the economy had stopped functioning entirely. Inflation surged. Black markets replaced official distribution. Workers abandoned, destroyed factories to search for food. Even military production officers admitted that output estimates were meaningless because nothing remained reliable. American intelligence analysts noted that Japan's industrial collapse was unprecedented. A modern economy reduced to pre-industrial levels without an invading ground force. This was the power of strategic bombing executed at scale, something no other aircraft in the world besides the B-29 could have accomplished at that time. The B-29s were more than machines. They were the physical evidence of what the American industrial engine could build when fueled by national determination. Each aluminium rivet, each bomb bay, each mile of range represented the factories, workers, and designers that made the aircraft possible. Japan had underestimated America's manufacturing might. They believed the U.S. could not project power across the Pacific with such intensity. But the B-29 proved otherwise. It showed that when American industry reached full speed, it could create fleets that overwhelmed geography itself. As the raids continued, Emperor Hirohito received updates indicating that even emergency production facilities were failing. Bombing had made it impossible to concentrate materials or protect factories. Resources ran out, and whatever remained could not be transported across a ruined nation. The American military leadership considered a prolonged air campaign, believing Japan might attempt one final surge of resistance. But the industrial figures told another story. Japan could no longer rebuild. There was nothing left with which to wage modern war. The B-29s had achieved what blockade and invasion might have taken years to accomplish. When Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed, Japan's leadership already knew defeat was inevitable. The atomic bombs made surrender unavoidable, but the B-29 campaign had already pushed the nation to the edge of collapse. The shock was not only nuclear, it was the realization that the Americans possessed overwhelming, unstoppable air power, backed by industry beyond imagination. After the war ended, investigators toured Japanese industrial sites. They found factories stripped of machinery, floors covered in ash, and entire districts erased. Economists studying the aftermath concluded that no amount of mobilization could have saved Japan once the B-29s began their systematic destruction. The story of 1945 is therefore not only about firestorms and cities burning. It is about a nation's industrial heart collapsing under the pressure of an enemy capable of producing more aircraft, more fuel, more bombs, and more steel than the Axis powers combined. Japan fought with courage, discipline, and resolve. But courage cannot manufacture aluminium. Resolve cannot forge steel. Discipline cannot replace electricity. In the end, the B-29 was the final expression of America's industrial dominance. Proof that the war would be won not just by soldiers on the battlefield, but by factories, engineers, and workers thousands of miles away. The collapse of Japanese industry in 1945 was the moment the modern world realized that air power, supported by industrial strength, could decide the fate of nations. And as the smoke finally cleared over the Pacific, The silent message was unmistakable. The war machine that America had built was unlike anything the world had ever seen.